The regular pattern of tidal volume makes it look quite simple. That regular pattern is caused by rhythms generated in the brainstem, especially from within the medulla. However, this regular smooth pattern can be modified in complex ways with signals from higher brain centers, including the cerebral cortex and the hypothalamus, chemoreceptors, and a couple of different types of reflex arcs. The medulla oblongata sets the basic respiratory rhythms. It does this because there are two medullary respiratory centers that appear to have large influences on this regular pattern of breathing. The first is referred to as the ventral respiratory group and abbreviated as the VRG. The second is called the dorsal respiratory group and abbreviated as the DRG. The ventral respiratory group sets the rhythm and helps integrate signals from other respiratory centers. The VRG contains neurons that control both inspiration and expiration. Inspiratory impulses travel down the phrenic nerve to the diaphragm and the intercostal nerve to the intercostal muscles. As these impulses reach those muscles, it causes contraction of those muscles. As they contract, it increases volume in the thoracic cavity, decreasing pressure, and air travels down its pressure gradient to fill the lungs. The expiratory signals that are part of this ventral respiratory group stop the transmission of these impulses. That means that the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles begin to relax, which leads to the normal passive kind of expiration. We said previously that inhaling is an active process, but normal, quiet exhalation is a passive process, not only because of the way the muscles are working, but because of the way these signals are traveling and working. Inspiratory signals actively travel down nerves, but expiratory signals stop that transmission. The dorsal respiratory group integrates signals from peripheral stretch and chemoreceptors and communicates that information to the VRG we were just talking about. Exactly what happens from this communication isn't entirely clear, but we can see that this DRG, dorsal respiratory group, is involved in relaying that information. In addition to the ventral respiratory group and dorsal respiratory group, there is an area that's referred to as the pontine respiratory centers that influence and modify the basic rhythm set by the ventral respiratory group. This helps to smooth out the transition between inspiration and exhalation, and vice versa, smoothing out the transition from exhalation back to inspiration. These pontine respiratory group modifies breathing during speaking, sleep, and exercise as well. The pontine centers receive signals from higher brain centers like the hypothalamus and the cerebral cortex, as well as sensory receptors in the periphery that help regulate our breathing pattern to match what is needed in the body at that moment in time. The depth of inspiration is determined by just how actively the respiratory centers stimulate the motor neurons serving the respiratory muscles. Think about this like the amount of signal traveling down towards these muscles. The greater the stimulation, the greater number of motor units that will be excited. As more motor units are excited, more muscle fibers will contract. Those muscle fibers contracting harder is going to cause an increased volume of the thoracic cavity, decreased pressure, and more air traveling into the lungs. We've changed the depth of inspiration by changing how hard those muscles contract in an indirect way, because we changed how many signals were traveling to those motor units. Respiratory rate, on the other hand, is determined by how long the respiratory center is activated. If the respiratory center is activated for a longer period of time, it can cause a slower pattern of breathing. But a short excitation of the respiratory center causes short, choppy kinds of breaths.